record. Do we think the recording in progress voice is inclusive?
It's robotic, isn't it? So I guess
Yeah,
it's not going to be anybody.
So guys, welcome to how to create successful inclusion marketing strategies and inclusive. Gosh,
That's all right. It's all good. So we are at part 2 of creating successful inclusive marketing strategies. And I am Paula Edgar, and she is Stefanie Marrone, and she is going to introduce herself right now. Stefanie, who are you?
Thank you. I'm Stefanie Marrone, and this is a link. This is just so you guys can see our LinkedIn profiles. Oh, Paula, look at that. We have almost the same amount of LinkedIn connections. I just realized that. I'm Stefanie Marrone. I'm a consultant who works with law firms and legal service providers. I was in-house at many different law firms, big law, small law, mid-sized law firms, and I'm outsourced CMO to a number of law firms. And one of the things I spend a lot of time working on is strategy for diversity when it comes to diversity marketing, et cetera, and how to do it right. And I always seek counsel from Paula. So Paula, introduce yourself, please. I'm also going to put our LinkedIn QR codes, guys, which is a great little tip. You can just hold up your mobile phones and scan our LinkedIn QR codes if you're not already linked with us.
Sure. I am Paula Edgar, and I am a diversity, equity, and inclusion consultant, trainer, keynote speaker, and I do things, I hope that you will visit my website, you'll see it, through the lens of inclusion, all of the things that I do, but professional development through the lens of inclusion. I mostly work with law firms and legal organizations, but I do things across industry, mostly with leaders. And I navigate difficult conversations in order to get to a place where we can work better, collaborate easier, and have a better impact on the world no matter what we do. And so I'm excited to be here collaborating with my friend again on thinking about this inclusion lens on marketing. So obviously anything you need to do when it comes to business, and even initiatives that you may not consider fully business. So any organization, you have to market your efforts. So even a nonprofit and law firm, whatever space, and thinking about how you do that through that lens of inclusion is important. And we're going to delve into some of the who's, the what's, the whys about this right now.
Yeah, perfect. And there are so many companies, law firms, and other professional service organizations that are so well intended with this, and they may not necessarily know where to start, what to do, how to do it. And so we hope to be able to give you some guidance. We also sometimes will suggest that you sit it out. It may make sense to say nothing sometimes, and maybe sometimes you go overboard on certain things. And so maybe, you have to find what's authentic and what's right for your culture. And I think something we both want to say is that, we know that there are a lot of companies that aren't as diverse as they would like, and that's okay. Your well-meaning intentions will get you, will go very far, is what I want to say on that. And so showing your organization internally and externally, and I definitely want you to talk about the importance of internal diversity marketing as well, because it's just as important, in my opinion, particularly during this Great Resignation time period. So we will be talking about all of these things, but just because your culture and your firm is homogenous, which, let's be honest, a lot of law firms are right now and are striving toward being more diverse. There are still things you can do to show to the world, to your clients, and to your employees that you are committed, and we'll show you some things. So the last time we did a program, which is available on YouTube, and I'll put a link to that in the chat, Paula and I spoke about how to appropriately market your Heritage Month commemorations and other diversity initiatives. So this was we saw so many things coming up for Black History Month and Martin Luther King Day, and they were all the same. And Women's History Month is going on right now. Paula, yesterday was like a sea of IWD, that's International Women's Day posts, very much the same. I purposely did not do the break the barrier myself. I did something a little different, and I have a few more posts coming up. But we want you guys to celebrate these things, but we want you to do it in an authentic way that stands out, and not just because everyone else is doing it. Paula, what did you think of? And by the way, if you guys have questions, comments, anything, we'll take some Q&As at the end. Put them in the chat or in the Q&A. I want, if you have any questions whatsoever that you want to make sure we cover. Paula, what were your thoughts on what you saw so far for this month? And I want to say it's not too late, guys, to do a Women's History Month or IWD post just because the day passed.
Well,
What were your thoughts
let me
what
tell,
you
first of
see?
all, I want to make sure you all know we tend to use, speaking of inclusion, letters and hashtags, et cetera. And I want to make sure you know. So IWD is International Women's Day, and that was yesterday. And what Stephanie's referring to is there was a lot of social media traction and a lot of emails yesterday in celebration of the impact of women. And some folks, because the theme for this year was Break the Bias, used this sign when they were doing that. And I laughed pretty much all day because this is also Wakanda Forever. So if you have your fist, if you're doing it like this, it's right. But if you're doing it like this, it's Wakanda Forever. And I was like, the inclusion
Yeah.
of this.
Doesn't Wonder Woman do this too? Like
she does this, like with
something like that. Okay.
So the funny part about it to me is that there were a lot of people who were using the sort of the X and the break symbol and not seeing the intersection, if they even knew about it, of the Wakanda Forever from the Black Panther movie sign. And so I saw a stark difference in sort of some of the ways in which people referred to it, and folks who understood that it had multiple meanings. And this is a perfect tee up into that things can have multiple meanings, and they can be separate and apart and fine, but that in the times in which we can use and merge some of the imagery, some of the words, some of the content and the attraction around something, we should. And so most of the Black women who I saw who did this, we're saying Wakanda Forever and IWD, which I had an extra oomph to it. But that being said, I did love, this is probably the most traction I've seen around any International Women's Day ever. And maybe I was just paying more attention, but there was so much happening. And we should be doing that, right? We should be, to the extent that you're not just copying and pasting. And I think we should talk about this. A lot of people were just copying and pasting content, like to say like, this is like, I don't know if maybe somebody sent out an email was like, you can use this, but they use that exact, and I was like, personalized stuff. You be authentic, utilize things that make you the you part of the post, or however you're engaging on the topic. That's a part of diversity, that's a part of inclusion. And in fact, you show what sameness as opposed to diversity and the benefits of it when you just copy and paste content. Don't do that.
No, so that text was on the IWD official website, and I kept seeing it, same thing. Yes. Paula, what are your thoughts with men who I saw doing this, and white men in particular, like just in general men? Like, did that rub you the wrong way? Do you think it's appropriate, or do you think that's where maybe men should be sitting it out?
No, I think that men should be doing that. I think that men should be honoring the impact of women. I think that International Women's Day is a perfect time. I saw a few posts where men were talking about the women in their lives and doing it, which I thought was wonderful. We cannot be in spaces where we're thinking about inclusion, and in fact, the organizations who care about this, the individuals who care about this, have to highlight one part of that. It's like these days, these commemorations really wouldn't be needed in the same way if there wasn't bias, if there wasn't disparate impact, and if there wasn't structural and systemic discrimination that leads to us having to say we have to elevate these groups. And since more than 50% of the population is women, absolutely. I think allyship is a wonderful way, as long as you're being respectful and thoughtful, that to show that you are inclusive. And for your specific ask about white men, in terms of who has a lot of the power in the world, and particularly here, and so we want to see that folks with privilege and power, you use that privilege and power to amplify the voices and the issues of folks who are who don't have it and who need to.
Always ask you that question because I always want to make sure that we get that point across, that you need the support of everyone, and sometimes a lot of times the people in power are the white men, and so we need their allyship, and they can be incredible supporters to help advance these things at our firms, at our companies. So I think it actually is a good thing. Okay, so Paula, I want to talk a little bit about a bunch of issues. If you guys want the slides, send me a note. I will be happy to send them to you guys. Leading, diversity marketing isn't just like, you putting together your marketing strategy and your marketing plan, and then you've got like diversity as like a bullet point and then some notes underneath it. To me, it like you've got to lead with diversity in every aspect, especially today, especially the composition of your clients. Everyone looks different, everyone is different. Your clients care about diversity. It's important to recruits. It's just important as good corporate citizens. And instead of thinking of diversity marketing like a type of marketing, I want you to think about it as a theme that ties all of your marketing together. So it's not just like email marketing or social marketing or whatever. It should really be ingrained in everything you do. Paula, what do you think about this? Also, I have a very badly behaved dog who is trying to jump up on my chair, who we're going to ignore. So Paula, what do you think about this? How do you weave in diversity marketing into an overall marketing strategy?
Well, first of all, I deliberately, and I think we've talked about this before, I don't use the term diversity marketing.
Yes.
I think it should be you're thinking inclusive in your marketing strategy, right? Inclusion and inclusivity, because diversity and being diverse, the state of being diverse is everybody. There's not everybody is diverse, but when we're thinking about diversity, we're thinking mostly about race, gender, etc. But I like the definition to mean the definition. So if you're talking about marketing for specific groups, I want you to say that. And really that when people think and sort of refer to that way, they're meaning wanting to be more inclusive in terms of who they impact and who they are spotlighting in their marketing efforts. And so I do think it should not be a siloed thing. So it shouldn't be, to Stefanie's point, another bullet point on your agenda, but it should be that the lens that you look at all of your strategy through should be inclusive, right? Questions that I often ask is, who is not considered here? Whose voice is not being represented? Who is not being represented? If we're representing a certain group, et cetera, are we doing it in a way in which we're using the correct language? Are we using imagery that speaks to a broader swath of people, whether internal or external? And asking those questions keeps you vigilant about not doing the same old thing, or sort of deferring back to some of the places where we get stuck and that tend to not be inclusive.
Yeah, and I think like it's so important to think about it, like Paula said, it's inclusive marketing, not just diversity marketing. And we're going to talk about, so many people think if they check off the boxes in terms of like, oh, we got Black History Month covered. Great. We had a guest speaker talk about Women's History Month. Maybe we have covered Pride Month. We're done for the year. But guys, there's so many more things that you're not thinking about with regard to inclusive marketing. And we're going to talk about that. It's not just gender or ethnicity. There are so many other things. So Paula, when you're doing a strategy, when you're talking to people, is that something like for me, that's like an aha moment for a lot of people. Like they're not necessarily like thinking about, okay, accessibility or other groups that they may be ignoring or other things they may be ignoring. Is there a way like you do like an audit when you start working with a client, or like do you like how do you figure out like where they need to focus or to open their eyes to like, hey, it's not just a Women's History Month campaign, or it's not just supporting Black History Month or MLK Day? How do you get them to think beyond that?
So one of the first things I do when I work with an organization, especially if I don't really have any context around the period, is I look at their website. I look at who they say they are, and then I find out who they actually are and see where there's alignment or misalignment. And I highlight that for them. And oftentimes the best information I get is when I do, either focus groups or listening sessions or, interviews, confidential interviews with specific people, stakeholders who will tell me some of the things like, oh yes, we have said for years that we're committed here, but in fact, we're not. And we've only ever had, 3 women leaders at the organization, or whatever the thing is. And so when thinking about strategy, the challenge about this is this. There's a gulf between where you are and where you want to be. No matter if you have the most inclusive, sort of internal impact and external impact, there's always a gulf between where you are and where you want to be, right? And so when you're thinking about your marketing strategy, and Stefanie at the beginning talked about that it goes both inward and external, you have to think, what are we doing this for? And I start with, what are our values? What are our stated values? And how then does inclusion align with that? So if you sell widgets, do you primarily sell widgets in certain geographic areas? In those geographic areas, who are your potential clients? Historically, who has been folks who supported your brand? Like, those are questions that you should ask. And then so in the dialogues that I have with folks, I find out what they know that their normal is, what they know that their sort of their certains are. And then I shake those certains up. Right? I say, okay, well, what are you preventing by not asking this question? Who else might be, potentially a client? Internally, if you're, spotlighting things externally, internally, what does that mean for the folks who are doing the work for you? And then you saying X, but maybe not representing or responding to them. And that has to do with a lot. So one example, you are marketing, even when you're not doing anything like what we're talking about in terms of, like, a post, or even, a flyer or something like that. You market in what you speak, even your bio, your bios and your, the bullet points and the talking points that you utilize when you're speaking to your internal clients and your employees. That's also marketing. And so, example, I was at a town hall the other day, and the leader of the town hall asked me to attend because they were talking about issues of diversity. And he started off by saying, hey guys, and this is something that I have worked on for years. That is my standard. I say guys all the time. Is it inclusive? No. Why do I say it? Because I was raised on teams. I grew up, played soccer, I played, where that is kind of the talk that you do. But what ends up happening, because they had an open forum, was that somebody immediately said, you can't talk about diversity and then just say guys, and knowing that more than half of your clients, and the internal and external, are women. And he was not doing it, in a consciously exclusive way. But in thinking about this, because I then asked questions afterwards in developing his talking points, because he had a team who did that, I said, you have to be very determined. You have to say specifically, highlighted in bold, right? Say everyone or team or something like that, when you're referring, as opposed to, because his immediate is guys. And that's for a lot of people. And the way we use is marketing as well.
You don't even realize that you're talking a certain way sometimes. So can I tell you another example? The difference between women, ladies, and girls. Like, I do not like when a man or anybody says ladies. It just, to me, rubs me the wrong way. And actually, there's research, and Paula, you know this better than I do, that woman is a much better term. Obviously, girls, we're not going to go there, but ladies is not a good term to use in an email and anything in a presentation. It should be women all the time. Do you come across that?
I'm sure that I do. I've been in too many situations in which gals is.
Gals is another one.
I think, especially these days, you want to think about who it is, what your normal way of interacting with folks. I say y'all a lot. I'm not Southern. I don't know why I say y'all a lot, but I do. But the things that you do naturally, to question them in terms of your inclusivity, in terms of how you show up in your spaces. You're triggering me, because I had an experience yesterday with someone where I actually thought I was being punked. I thought somebody was setting me up, because this person who I interacted with did every single thing that I would tell somebody not to do in an interaction with somebody. I was like, where I was like, that show, What Would You Do with John Quinones? I thought that he was going to jump out. No, I'm so serious. I was like, you think you got me tricked? You do not have me tricked. I know. And then it was not. It just was. I think I'm going to write or do a TikTok or something about it, because it really sat with me. And my daughter walked in when it was happening with somebody who came to my home to do for a service. And I was just like, you have met the right person at the right time, because every single thing you say, I'm going to challenge it, because this is the work that I do. And by the time we left, even though we were so different, so different, I had challenged everything that he had said that was not inclusive, and said to him, essentially, why did that come up? Let's talk about why that doesn't work. And he said at the end of it, I thank you for, clearly I didn't change his life, but he said, thank you for saying what you said and not pointing the finger at me. And that is such a piece, because when you can have dialogues with folks about the fact that they may not be showing up in the appropriate space, particularly around language, and to do it in a way where you're not like, I can't believe it's right, but to say, hey, that's not what we say now. Or, try to do this differently, or here's why that hurts, and I want to talk to you about it. Those are really great ways to show up and still be impactful and still hold your ground without being, what's the word, without having the tensions that you might have.
Yeah, or be like preachy to him or whatever it is, or making him feel bad about it. That's great. That's so I can't wait to see that post. I can't wait to hear what he said.
I'm still processing it. I gotta be clear. I'm still processing.
There's a reason why people cross our paths, right? And the work that you do can help people grow. So there was a reason why you met him, and that was good for him. I'll tell you, by the way, an inclusive marketing strategy is not just slopping up on your website that you have a diversity committee. That's probably the worst of all. Like, I mean, that's like just the check and balance of like wanting to make sure your clients are seeing and, putting on a diversity page and saying, oh, you've had like a few diversity events over the course of time. That's not a diversity that's not an inclusive marketing strategy, in my opinion, Paula. And also, like, I see a lot of people conflate like diversity with women's initiatives, or like put all the things together. And I'm not sure, even based on the size of an organization, if that really makes sense. Like, some people say, well, I don't know, we need a separate women's initiatives group, but then also where they're not thinking about like also like the LGBTQIA community as well. They're not thinking about other groups. They're just thinking about it in what they think diversity is. So any advice, like if you're trying to create like a diversity page on your website, or diversity one page, or you have to answer an RFP and you want to put something about diversity, what do you recommend for that?
So I thought you were going to go a different place with the question. So I'll answer where I thought you were going to go, and then I'll answer what you just asked. So I often show up in the lives of people when they have said, oh, we have a diversity committee, and now we want to work with a diversity consultant because we need to make change. And then I, will ask questions like, okay, tell me about your diversity committee. Who is it comprised of? And again, I work with a lot of law firms. Well, it's comprised of partners and the managing partner and one associate and,
maybe,
maybe. Right, maybe, exactly. And then, insert somebody else. And then I say, okay, is the diversity committee only for the lawyers at the firm?
Yes.
And sometimes the answer is no, but we only have representation from lawyers at the firm. And I go, then it's not inclusive. And then I say, is there any sort of initiative or grouping that is formed for professional staff? And it's either yes, to which I ask, why is it separate? It should be separate in terms of some of the ways in which you're talking about certain topics, because they don't collaborate, but the umbrella of what you do for the organization, it should, right? And the separation of those two pieces, it challenges me in a very deep way, particularly at law firms, because it's a part of exclusion that is not addressed a lot.
I talk about this a lot, is having been on that side.
What you asked about how do you then sort of show you what your initiatives are in a one page or on a website. So I think one of the things you want to do is to actually be true with yourself. What are you actually doing? So a lot of law firms, and actually I shouldn't even just call it law firms, organizations generally have just started putting out the website, the page on their site that has diversity and inclusion with any real meat on it. So sometimes they had diversity and inclusion and be like, we really care about diversity and inclusion with nothing else.
We're committed to fostering an environment of blah, blah, blah.
More things on there. But what it'll say is that since 2020, we've been really excited about that.
Since summer 2020.
Right. Since it's marketing, that's, in my mind, not something that you should do. Unless you have an initiative that you launch in specific to respond to XYZ, you shouldn't do that. Why? Because it is a clear, like you're actually saying, we only started really caring about this the last 2 years. And in my mind, that's not good marketing. Now, I don't want you to do anything where it's just words and no action. So I'm assuming that when you're doing that, then the action is happening, you're actually doing initiatives. But I know that the case for many people is that that's not the case. So what you're putting out there is not necessarily truths that currently exist. Challenges that I have is when you include people's pictures and they leave.
Yeah.
So there's a ton of places that will still use, and you as an employee tend to probably, you have your employees sign off on being able to use their imagery. And so it's not illegal, it's just icky.
Can I tell you what's worse? when I see people use stock images of people who aren't at their firm, just because they maybe don't have any diverse employees. And so then they pull pictures from photo stock companies and they use that. And I think that is so disingenuous. So that is a no-no for me personally. And also there is no inclusion in excluding your staff from anything, whether it is, and listen, I, Paula, am such an outspoken person because I have a big problem with like less maternity leave, less pay for staff, you know, versus
Less
lawyers.
resources, less benefits, less
Everything. It's a whole other topic. Don't get me started. But if you're going to have a diversity program and then only make it accessible and to the lawyers, that is not inclusion at all.
Well, I want to go back to your question about the stock imagery because we differ here.
Oh, so, okay. Tell me why.
I'll tell you why. So usually any imagery that is utilized that is stock, because I think a lot of folks use stock imagery just in their stuff, period, it's white, right? And so in my mind, if you're going to use stock imagery just generally, that is not representative of people who are actually at your space. So that my overarching is, if you use it anyway, then make sure it is inclusive. Make sure that it's representing different groups, because it's usually like in the background of something, like in your, so it's not like, you know, this stock imagery works here. It is stock imagery to make it seem as though that these are activities, the things, these are imagery that we're using to represent sort of how we feel about ourselves. What I want is to be, I'm making sure I'm going to say this right, that we are inclusive in thinking about that. So if you're using stock imagery anyway, and if you're, and I'll take it internally too, if you are decorating your offices, right, and you're putting things up in your offices, and I know we're all thinking about going back to, you know, in the hybrid space right now, make sure the imagery that you are showing is not only one demographic. And so I am not at all, I want to make sure we're very clear, I'm not saying that you should be utilizing stock imagery to replace the fact that you don't have representation in your organization. What I'm saying is, if you are going to incorporate it anyway, make sure that it is diverse. Now, any organization you can go to for the most part and look and see who actually works there, and then they usually have pictures. And when they don't have pictures, I always think it's because there's no diversity, right? They don't want you to actually be able to scroll down and see. So when you're thinking about inclusion and marketing there, that's another piece that you might want to think about. And I know that we're sort of kind of chatting about the things that we want to talk about, but I want to hear, particularly those who went to the other, both sessions, and I guess anybody, but what questions do you have about this? Because this is a challenge, right? You have to show who you want to be, even when you're not there yet.
Yes.
And do it in a balanced way so that you're not being disingenuous, but you're being hopeful. But you don't want people to think that you're misrepresenting what you actually are, but you can show and tell what you want the space to be with examples like artwork and stock imagery, but do it in a way that is thoughtful. So if your normal is white or male, then challenge that with additional imagery is what I'm saying.
Yeah, like the portraits I see when I walk into some law firms and it's all like very old white men, it's time maybe to take those down or put them somewhere else. I would just say.
Yeah, well, there's not a lot you can do about that piece, right? Like, it's like,
no, I know. I mean, but maybe it's time to just think about things in a more strategic way, or just, where those go, maybe not in the lobby.
I mean, my favorite example about that is like, for example, the New York City Bar Association, in which I'm a board member, right? So the leadership, the past leadership is mostly older white men. And so that's who is on the walls because they put up the presidents, et cetera. But they had an initiative that said, we're going to start to fund putting more women on the walls. And because they have done such a great job in terms of making more diversity in their actual space, when you actually walk in the doors of the building, the board is there. And there are photos of the board, which is really diverse. So they're making an effort to say, well, that's the past. They're not really, we can't like make them something that they're not.
It really makes a big difference. If you guys were on our first program, you saw the example Paula showed of the firm that did not have a very diverse class of their new, their promoted associates. And it was it was really just such a faux pas for a firm that actually is so diverse. And it's like a picture does tell 1,000 words. And so sometimes it's better to not use the images at all. So to move on just a little bit, your approach in and shouldn't really focus on just sharing the DEI work your brand is doing. I think you should think about also focusing on how you bring principles of DEI to all of the work that you do. And so I guess I would just say, think about all of your content and all of your initiatives externally and internally and externally, evaluating those through that lens, even when they don't necessarily specifically relate to DEI efforts. Being more inclusive permeates everything we do, but be ready to get it wrong sometimes. Like this firm that we spoke about, you would think that it would have gone through checks and balances and somebody's alert would have gone up and said, whoa, like we need to pull the plug on this image, right? But it didn't. And then they were very forthcoming with an apology and all of those things, but the damage was done and that picture is out there. Being authentic is okay. Paula, the last time you talked about being vulnerable, which I love, which like I've been telling my clients to do. So this was sort of like, we're learning as you're learning. This is, something that, as we are trying to become a more inclusive and diverse organization, we are hosting events to blah, 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 right? I mean, it shows that, you're not necessarily there yet, but you're trying to get there. And I think there's authenticity in that. So, Paul, what do you think? You want to talk about this a little bit? Authenticity and being vulnerable. And some people like shy away from the vulnerable because they think it doesn't make their organization seem strong, but I disagree with that. I think it makes you seem like a much more human environment and much more relatable for most people, and including clients who, by the way, work at companies who don't, or are also striving to make all these things happen.
So no organization runs without the people in it. Right. And especially in, during the time of the pandemic and right now, and you think about what's happening with the Ukraine, all the other sort of challenging things that we're navigating, what folks want is empathy and understanding. And that, I mean, maybe should be our first inclusive piece where we think, yes, we still have to say that we are selling this bottle of Pepsi or whatever the thing is, but we understand that at this time, it is hard to focus on regular things because the world is falling down. And so we want you to know that we are challenged too. And in order to navigate the space that we are in, we're letting you know that we all moving a little bit slower and then take a little bit more time. So be gentle with, things like that. People don't run away from that. They actually say, you know what, I'm going to continue to buy that bottle of whatever the thing is because they recognize where we are. They said who they are, and nobody, what organization has said we have it? Except for Ben & Jerry's, they do have it. I think that they has said we have got this right. We're doing it well. We've been consistent in doing it. It's not new. It's old, etc. Nobody. Everybody is working on this, and so to get be ready to get it wrong, you should expect that in all of your best efforts, right, your intent can be wonderful, and it should be that, that makes a difference, that your impact can get it wrong. And so one of the recommendations that I have around that is that you need to make sure that there is not only one person who's making decisions about what goes internally or externally, that there should be, and if there is, because people have pushed back with me on this as well, saying, we're not resourced, we don't have that. If you do have only one lens that is going to be managing these things for you, make sure that lens is properly trained and educated around inclusion, right? Actually invest in making sure that person understands the impact of bias, knows what blind spots are, and that we literally don't see things that are not in our affinity, in our shared affinity, so that they are looking to break some of the biases, right?
Right? Yeah.
And
I'm not sure. So I had a situation where a man was trying to run the Women's History Month campaign, and it was a little tough, especially for some of the women who were involved, because we had very strong opinions on what we thought worked, and we felt like we couldn't really do much about it. And that was tough because you feel like a little silenced. And so it can't just come from one person, to Paula's point. And I've lived through this recently. It can't just come from one person's vantage point. It's always shrouded in their biases and their experience. And if they're not a trained diversity professional, they aren't the only one to tell you what's right or wrong. There is no right or wrong with any of this. I will say one other thing about being tone deaf. I don't like seeing firms put everything on social or email marketing that are just about how great they are. This goes beyond inclusive marketing strategies, but I think it's very important to bring up. In general, people who know me know that I feel very strongly about like those me posts, the Chambers Awards, the we just closed the Deal Award, very me-centric, especially with what's going on in the Ukraine. I have encouraged my clients to post about the Ukraine right now, to say, to give money to charities. If you guys are looking for charities to support, to give a donation, let me know. I'm happy to send you the list that I put together. It's been hard for me personally to post about the things I was posting because they seem trivial compared to what people are dealing with in these war-torn areas. So I would just encourage you to think far beyond, like, what are you posting? Can it wait? Is it important? And are you in tune with what's going on in the world? And if not, hold some of those posts, because you've got to be sensitive. If anything, we've learned, like, just because COVID and some of the tough times that we've had are past us, it doesn't mean that we have to throw compassion by the wayside. Like, you need to be sensitive in all you do. And everybody's looking at us online every day, judging us individually and as an organization. So be really careful. So I do think it's important for some of these social causes to also think about, where your firm fits in here and what you could do to be a good corporate citizen, because some of these things are, just tell a story about who you are as an organization.
So this is probably the hardest part. And I'd love to hear what some of the folks who are attending think, and put this in the chat or ask in the Q&A. This is the hardest part, because when you have things that are current events, topical, to manage, you deal with the impact on you as an individual driving change as a leader. You deal with the perception that you have about your employees who are managing this. And even if they are not a part of the group that's being impacted, they are being impacted because it's a social challenge. And then you think about your customers and what they need to hear or what they expect to hear from you. And that sort of triad of, this is a lot to think about, is can lead to just feeling frozen and not doing anything at all. And this is where I think that the marketing strategy of being very authentic and vulnerable makes the best sense. So for those of you who are on my mailing list, I did this yesterday. I had a really hard time with this because, I know what's going on in Ukraine. It's just like everything is terrible, but I deal in terrible for a living. I deal in terrible all the time, right? And so for me, it's like, well, which terrible am I going to elevate today? Is it the environment? Is it racism? Is it sexism? There's a lot of terrible to go into. And so what I did in my newsletter yesterday was to say, everything is terrible. I feel terrible about that. Here's some resources, because if this is what you're thinking about and you're terrible, please look at this. And here's some resources about Ukraine. That's how I said it. I did it in that way because I wanted to model this. You don't have to get it. You don't have to be like, well, hello, everyone. I can clearly let you know that I am thinking. Don't be somebody who you're not. And I mean that organizationally, and I mean that individually.
Yeah.
Right. It is one of the things that I appreciate about Stefanie so much, is that when she does things on social media, she says, listen, I'm not having a great day, and we're allowed not to have a great day. And that's important. And people connect because of that. And I think that the more individuals and organizations can do this. And so I want to take that and also answer the question that came up in the Q&A at the same time.
Yeah, I know. I like the question, but I have a stomach virus, just so everybody knows. And I feel like death, and Paula knows this, but I keep soldiering on because I have to. And and I want to be here with you guys. So the question that came in is a good one. Yeah. Any suggestions on first steps for an organization take toward creating an inclusive culture? We were going to talk about this, but there's no time like the present to do it. So Paula?
Yeah, did you have a slide on this? I think you had something that you
no,
yeah, go back. That, yes, no, go stop it. That one.
Okay, so we were just going to get into this. So yeah, Paula, tell us.
So my answer is that people often try to run before they learn that they can just stand up. And so to
not even walking, just standing.
Right, just stand up. It's to stand up as the first way to do any sort of strategy movement. And when you're thinking about inclusion, it is a strategy movement as well, is to assess where you are right now. Where are you? Are we getting it right in terms of recruiting? Is our staff and our leadership, not just our staff, but our leadership, are they diverse? In diverse in the ways in which we think we're doing well, and in the ways that we don't. We have representation in terms of people who are from the LGBTQ status, or from, who are disabled, like all of these things. Are you looking at it to see where you can do better? And again, you can't always, check every single box, but you can be thinking about who is not represented in their spaces. And then from there, decide who you're going to have as stakeholders to help drive this. Notice I'm not saying create a diversity committee. I'm specifically not saying create a diversity
committee. That's so 2001, in my opinion.
When you do it, and it's sort of like porting the responsibility to other people. You want to say, these are going to be the stakeholders. Try to have some volunteerism and also some voluntoldism about that, to say, like, this is who we want to create to help with this, but not to do it, but to say that we're going to engage someone or to provide resources internally. And if you do that internally, that might mean hiring someone, a chief of diversity, whatever. If you don't have the resources to do that, then you need to think about, if you're tasking your employees to manage inclusion, diversity, equity, et cetera, then you have to compensate them for that. And I don't mean that you have to necessarily give them more money, but you might have to say, okay, we're going to add additional time. You get more vacation days, but you can't just say, we expect you to do more because it's for the good of you and the people, and think that folks are not going to be angry about that. It's actually the antithesis of being inclusive, and it's definitely not equitable. So think thoughtfully about how you're going to do that. Ask for help, get resources, et cetera. And then from there, decide how the things how your values align with the things that you want to do, because there's usually folks who are driving this, right? And it's their values along that drive whatever the initiatives are. It should be the organization's values and how DE&I kind of inclusion kind of welds into that. It can't be separate, can't be siloed, or else it doesn't work properly. It becomes much more words and not actions. If you align it with what you've already said is important to you as an organization values-wise, then it works better. It feels like less of a challenge. It's more like, if we really say that it's important for us to impact the world because of whatever thing, we know that our impact on the world is going to be better if we have a more inclusive staff, right? Like that you align them up so that it's not separate. I would start there, but even more than that, you need to have education. Oftentimes people are using the same words and have different meanings. And so having a baseline education around this, starting with unconscious bias and how it impacts, everybody's interaction with each other, getting a definition organizationally of what diversity is. What does it mean? Because I might say it and you might think, oh, well, shit, definitely means race. I mean everything, like I said at the beginning of this. Not everybody does. Some people use the word diversity and they mean X. So you need to have an understanding in your organization, what do these words mean to us? And then take that and say, now that we have that, done that background work, now we're ready to move. What I can tell you is nobody wants to do that background work. They just want to be like, okay, we're going from zero to everybody here is diverse and we all hold hands and leap into the future. That's just not what happens. And if you don't do that work, all of the policies and protocols you put together, they collapse because you have not put foundational work into becoming an inclusive culture. So that was a little long, I apologize, but it's important.
No, it's good. And I just would say here, show, don't tell. I hate when people are like with the diversity committees, telling everyone what they are and what they do. Show, highlight your employees' actions and your company's ongoing work, and through education. So have a speaker like Paula come, highlight terrific women trailblazers, right? Do an educational program, alumni. Tap into your alumni, invite them back. That's a great thing to do to engage with your alumni and to also help show different career paths. Volunteering. There are so many things your firm can do to give back to the community. So do it and spend that money wisely. Align it with the clients and what's important to your clients. But there are so many organizations that need help. Recommend, promote, and amplify resources. So this is something Paula does, and I love. You can find something on Paula's website about this where there are resources. I think this was a great idea for a post for Women's History Month or Black History Month. You could give resources to different organizations where people can Learn and contribute, NAACP, Legal and Defense Fund. There are women's organizations, Lean In, et cetera. There are nonprofits that mean something to you and your organization. Ask your employees for their suggestions, even better, and tell employees stories. You'd be surprised what you can find out about people if you actually ask them. So this isn't just asking them for a quote on, I'm a woman, and this is why Women's History Month is important to me, because we've seen that, we've been there, we've done that. This is more, this goes beyond that. This goes beyond this finding out the trailblazers at your organization and finds out like why they do what they do. Are they involved in an organization that does something for the greater good of your community? Maybe they're involved with an organization that helps the blind and you don't know why. And so find out and feature them and all those things, right? So just think beyond and think bigger. I also would like you all to think about looking at your team. So this doesn't mean you need to fire everyone in your team and hire a team that is diverse. This just means that your content marketing team and your marketing team in general doesn't reflect the diversity of your audience. And if not, how can you make it more inclusive? You can do that by hiring somebody like Paula. You can do that by hiring a freelance writer. You need to make sure you have different perspectives. I would also say you need to make sure your writers and editors think critically and understand that the world has changed in terms of nomenclature. So I don't know if you knew this, of course, Paula did, but I found this out recently that the AP Style Guide has a new section on race-related coverage. And they actually did it before the pandemic and before 2020. So that makes me a little happier with them. But it covers everything from how to reference people based on their racial identity to why you should even question whether race is even relevant, or also pronouns and the appropriate ways to use those. And I think this is really important. So if you feel like your people need a primer on this, go look at this, get this new style guide. And then I'm going to talk about this in a second about making content accessible. Inclusive marketing is about making sure that everybody can see your content. You spend all this time creating it. What's the point if no one can see it? Alt text, so important. Color, don't distinguish your options by color only for people who have issues with their vision. Use captions for all videos. Not only does it help people who don't have any disabilities engage with your content more, but it also helps those who do be able to access and interact with your content. And include transcripts for any audio or video content. So if you're doing a lot of videos or podcasts, you need to do an you need to do a written transcript of that, and vice versa. This is how, number one, you engage more with your audience, but number two, you make your content more accessible. So Paula, thoughts on any of this?
Yeah, I agree with you 100% about the things that make what you're trying to get out into the world accessible. And one of the things that you mentioned, most folks don't necessarily think about, which is there are so many people who have disabilities that are not visible, right? And so I have ADHD, and for me, if I see and hear someone teaching, I learn it better and I'm able to focus more versus just hearing. Right? And so having a diversity of your content as you are presenting anything is also an important piece. But, when in hosting webinars as well, I also say, please let us know if you need X accommodation, right? And so that there is the opportunity for folks to step up and say, please provide XYZ accommodation during your session. And
guess what we're going to be doing for this webinar and going forward? We will have a transcript available of this webinar with every and like that I've said, so that people can access this and see it. And there's actually a really cool tool on YouTube that's free that I can show you how to get a transcript of your webinar for free right on YouTube, if anyone wants me to show them how to do it before we end. Paula, you're going to say something else?
No. I think we can go into talking about is the camel case?
Yeah, I'm going to talk about that. And I just wanted to mention about inclusive language in your marketing materials. What assumptions are you making about potential clients, potential existing clients? This is like little nomenclature things, like saying partner instead of spouse, partner or spouse instead of husband or wife. Those sorts of things, right? So think about what you're saying and how you're saying it. be mindful and proactive. Okay.
And with
So,
really quickly. So,
yeah.
I want to, so in this vein, I want to talk to you about a choice that I make when I do things that some folks don't do. So you'll see on my window, I don't have my pronouns, my she, her pronouns listed. And I strategically don't do that because I'm often online in particular with people who I am helping to shift narrative with, to have understand this. And what happens is when, you know, I coach and interact with a lot of older white men. And I say that and give you that demographic only for context, because I do think that there are people of every demographic and every intersection that are stuck in their spaces. But I can recall the first time I did use pronouns in a Zoom window, that one of my clients like flipped out, like literally was like, I am so exhausted of this. I don't know what I'm gonna do anymore. And it's not even grammatically correct. And he was getting really
Oh, no.
And so what it was is that because I am in the business of driving diversity and inclusion, I'm also in the business of change management, and change is hard. And so I'm gonna get them there, and I did get him there, but I don't want their initial interaction with me to be, I'm already, just in case you didn't know, I'm Black and I'm a woman. I'm already bringing in a space, and I use a lot of nails and I got red lipstick all the time. So I'm already shifting narrative by just existing in the space. And so I tend to ease into things to make it stick more and to give more context about it. But if you follow me on LinkedIn, you know that my LinkedIn profile does have my pronouns on it, because I figure most people are coming to find me there, as opposed to me interacting with folks who are trying to be to learn the space. I wanted to give you that context because, again, it's not the same process for everybody. It's thoughtful and being strategic about how you're going to shift narratives.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I'm glad you made that point. Okay. So being inclusive in your content, use alt text every single time you upload an image. You can do this actually on LinkedIn easily, as well as in your WordPress website, or you have another CMS tool. This will help you also as an ancillary benefit for those of you who want to improve your SEO, search engine optimization. But this helps people who are visually impaired to understand what your image is about, okay? And it also helps convey your messages when your website or the page is actually taking longer to load up. It helps you in many ways, and it is a good thing to do because it is the right thing to do, guys. Stick to simple, legible fonts. If you're not sure what those are, you can find those online. Camel case in your hashtags. So most people don't do this. This means, so they say camel because camel has two humps. So you capitalize like the first letter of the word. So like you'll see here, this is a camel case hashtag. So social media, the S and the M would be capitalized. And this makes it easier for people just in general as they're skimming, which they are doing, to see your hashtag, okay? Captions for all videos. If you need a tool, I tell Paula this all the time. She and I go back and forth on what tools we use for captions. I use two different ones, Mixed Caption and CapCut. I pay for them. They're not expensive, and they get things wrong, like calling me Step on Me Moron as my name. Paula, all the time, my last name is Moron, and they do, you have to go in there, fix the text a little bit. They do get all the ums and the likes. You just go in and you delete them. If I will do a program on video marketing, and if that's helpful for folks to show you how I do that, but it is an absolute must, because also most people, whether or not this is a conversation about inclusive marketing, they're viewing social media without the sound on and they're scrolling through. So you will reach people with the words. Also, to Paula's point about ADHD and just in general, I learn things much better when I see the words. Other people learn things differently. I don't have a disability to my knowledge yet, although I have a lot of challenges, but I can tell you just different strokes for different folks about the way we retain and learn information. But if you are trying to reach people who have a real disability, this is the right thing to do. Also, law firms, FYI, there's a lot of lawsuits, class action suits against firms that don't have accessible websites. So don't wind up in that category. Make sure your site is at least in the category that is the lowest accessible category. And if your firm purports to do anything in labor and employment law that has to do with folks that have disabilities, you better make sure that you also have that higher level of accessibility. There are plugins you can get. There are companies that will work with you to make sure your site is accessible, but do not make yourself vulnerable. Transcripts for all audio and video interviews we mentioned. I use a couple different tools and I can show you some of them, but we'll do a recap of this. These are very important, guys, not just for inclusive marketing, but marketing in general, realizing we all learn and retain information differently.
So what questions we want to take? We have a couple minutes left.
Yeah, and I would say, Alex is a free online tool that helps you find gender favoring non-polarizing race related. Like it helps you find like all the inconsiderate tools. Try this. Be intentional when you choose your stock images. And then if you want to find out about holidays and commemorative events, you can see part 1 or Paula's website for a list of DEI events. For those of you who want to see, you can ask any questions. We have 3 minutes left, but I will show you guys, if you want to see the tool that I was mentioning. There were a few people who said, I'm just going to share my screen, Paula, for 1 second. Let me show you guys where the video is. So follow me on YouTube. So if you go to a video and you go to the 3 little ellipses here and you go to open transcript, and then you go to toggle timestamps and you remove it. Okay, so I'm gonna do that. You can then copy this into a Word document and do a search and replace and remove all of the paragraph breaks and get this into become a free transcript, which is terrific and great because it's not. Unfortunately, YouTube doesn't do automatic captions that are great. So I find I upload mine in here directly, but this is a great way to get a free transcript if you don't want to pay for a transcription tool too. Okay.
Thanks.
Thank you, Carrie. Nice to see you on the webinar. I'm glad you're here. Yeah, Chris Fritch, actually, those of you who know Chris, told me about that trick and I didn't know it existed. So any video you find interesting, by the way, if you have any videos from the past, go back, pull that transcript and turn it into a blog post. You have now 2 pieces of content and you are a more inclusive organization. Any other questions, guys? I want to thank you guys for joining us. Those of you who asked for some resources, we'll do a follow-up. We will send some things and I hope you guys learned from today. I want to thank you for all the nice comments in the chat and I hope you guys have a great day.
Bye all.
Paula, safe travels.
Thanks. See ya.